We are descending down onto the Mun's surface, and actually we're trying to dock onto Unity Base with the docking port junior there on the top. And I'm having a little bit of trouble. We'll just pop up here and try very gently to ease over to the port without breaking. You know what? Let's try that again. This is Echo 3, and let's continue our modded career mode discussion. Currently, we have 2 probes on their way to Duna. Both of them need to make a mid-course correction burn. They both also have different ScanSat parts on them, which we'll be using to scan the surface of Duna for various things, such as its biomes, its anomalies, its resources. Now, we have to set these up into polar orbits so that we can scan the whole surface. Basically what happens is Duna will rotate underneath our probes, and the probes will be able to scan everything. We should be able to get a lot of science from all of this, and that'll be exciting to help push our program further. I'm hoping that we'll be able to land crew on Duna or Eve here in the near future. But we need to set up these probes first. I'd like to scan the surface of both Eve and Duna so we can find interesting things to visit, potential landing sites. But obviously we need to set up these probes first. And just setting up our retrograde burn here. This is where we're going to get into orbit. Now both of these probes coming around Duna also have relay antennas on them, and we can use them if we want to transmit data from a rover or something on the surface of Duna. The other probe we have is going to Eve. Now I have 2 contracts for Eve. One is to gather science from a flyby of Eve, and the other is to gather several different types of ScanSat scans of the planet. So this probe will be able to complete both contracts. As soon as we get into Eve's sphere of influence, we'll be on a flyby trajectory, and we can complete the flyby contract. But rather than actually flying by, we will then get ourselves into orbit, which I'm setting up here, also trying to get into a polar orbit. And it's really handy. I'm using the alarm clock mod to bounce back and forth between the different probes and when they need to burn. Eve is quite handy in that it generates, or it sees a lot more sun, and so we are able to do a lot more with the solar panels as opposed to Duna, where the solar panels just do not have the same effect, which the further you away from the sun, the less the solar panels are able to do. Till you get like out to Elu, where solar panels are only 4% what they are on Kerbal, which makes using the RTGs a much better option for power when you're that far out. Same thing here, we got this probe. Now we'll be using the solar panels, but on some of these probes here, I can't use all of my experiments at the same time. So I'll have to make one scan, and when it's done, I'll shut down those experiments and then turn on the others, which will be all right. We have enough power to run some of the experiments, and then we can just shut it down and run the others as needed. Now, because we'll be having 2 probes in orbit around Duna, at some point we may want to put them in some kind of synchronous, at least synchronous with each other, so that they'll be on opposite sides of the planet at all times. But right now I'm not worried about that. I'm just worried about getting their scans. When we start sending other things to Duna, if we need to worry about the relay antennas, we can work on setting up our orbits as needed. And that's a kind of a handy thing. With 2 probes both in polar orbit, we should be able to maintain basically full coverage on the surface of Duna all the time. I don't really worry about setting up full ComSat networks. Usually I don't need 100% coverage. It's just I haven't found it necessary. I don't usually do much with rovers anyway, and with probes, usually you can have enough coverage to do what you need to do. Now both of our probes around Duna are set, and we'll have some time to wait before our Eve probe is where it needs to be. So I'm going to pick up a couple contracts, and we have one to take tourists to our Unity base and another to take some crew to the Unity base. That'll work out perfectly. We can complete it all in one launch. So I'm going to make a probe here, or a capsule here, very similar to some of the other ones I've made before. But in this case, I need to dock to Unity Base because tourists can't get out of the capsule. And Unity Base has a docking port junior on the top. So I'm putting a docking port junior on the bottom of our ship, and it's my goal to try and land exactly on top of the docking port junior, which if they connect, then it will all be the same, considered the same vessel, and I will complete the contracts that way. I won't have to have anyone EVA or anything or transfer vessels, but I have to get these two craft to dock. I think some RCS fuel and some thrusters will help with that. I'm going to go with 4 engines. I'm using the Spark engines. I'm going to use 4, and initially I was thinking about using 3. I want a little higher thrust to weight ratio and increase the delta V, because I'm not going to be the most efficient. I'm not going to be coming down, I think, and doing a full just suicide burn and nail the target the first time. I'm trying to budget a lot of extra margin for corrections and throw in a few solar panels, just make sure we don't run out of power. I've got a lot of reaction wheels on this. Those pods don't come with reaction wheels themselves, so I added extras, and I want this to be a fairly nimble craft so I can, land this thing exactly how I need to. Throw in a few solar panels on that. We use the Cheetah engine. I'm going to use my Kerbal Engineer. I don't know, it didn't like the way the docking port was set up, and it wasn't, I guess, registering the delta V readout for the separate stages very well. So I'm actually going to be looking at the stock delta V readout, which seems to understand what I'm doing better than Kerbal Engineer. That is more of a first for me. Normally Kerbal Engineer I've found to work better. Now we have enough delta V with the 2 stages here. So our last stage is going to land and return from the Mun. Our second stage there, our middle stage, is going to finish circularizing around Kerbin and transfer to the Mun and probably start our deorbit burn, if what we have left there. Checking our thrust to weight ratio, we can have another fuel tank. That looks about right. That'll almost get this craft into orbit. I'll throw on 4 fins here on the bottom. That'll just help with stability on launch. Now I'm making sure I've got lots of auto struts on this thing. Some of these longer craft can get a little noodly, so I add some auto struts, and I'm going to add some regular struts that's just connected with a docking port junior there. That will just help keep the payload inside the fairing from wobbling around. Struts are a wonderful tool. Use them. They keep your craft stable. Now we need 1 pilot. I'm going to use Jebediah because this is a tricky thing to do, to land on a docking port, and so I want my best pilot in there. Load our tourist and launch towards the Mun. This is pretty standard launch. I try to be as aggressive as possible. We have a good thrust to weight ratio. I think it's around 1.4. That's more than I like. I usually like around 1.3, so I can afford to be aggressive on this and see how efficiently I can get into orbit. I don't think I did great. Deploy the fairing and set everything up, deploy, and burn out and finish our circularization around Kerbin. Now we'll target the Mun. I know it has a new ability in the game that it can set up your home and transfer maneuvers for you. I don't know. Maybe I'll use it. I'm kind of old school as far as setting up my own maneuvers, and I don't always want to do a home and transfer. If you watch what I was doing to get out to Eve, I'm not doing a home and transfer per se out to Eve. I'm transferring out. Anyway, I did a different process. I left at the ascending node there, which is a little different. Now we're going to get into orbit, and I want the base to be on the light side just so I can see what I'm doing better. There we go. And my orbit path is coming up to cross. Now we are going to burn retrograde and try and basically come down straight over the base. I'm going to be using the Kerbal Engineer landing guidance there, and that's that red circle you see, and I'm going to I'm not going to try and land directly on the base. I'm going to land maybe close and just set up what I'm doing here. Just really careful with these controls. I'm going to use the RCS to do most of the guidance. My goal here is to try to get the engines firing and producing about equal to the MUN's gravity as far as force. And we got it. We connected. Didn't break anything. We'll get a little science there. Collect some science from Jeb. Might as well make the most out of this. Tourists spent their time there. Now we pretty much just launched straight east, and we're really at the right time to leave for Kerbal. We just need to eject the MUN, leaving it retrograde to its orbit around Kerbal. Which you can see, I have right-clicked on my periapsis there to see exactly what's going on with it, and I just need to get it into the atmosphere somewhere between 15 and 45. Anywhere in there, we'll come home. This capsule's got enough ablator. As long as you're not using any weak parts, any of the capsules are fine without even a heat shield coming back from the MUN like this. There we go. Everyone's there. Collected quite a bit of funds from that. Now we're going to go back to our Eve probe and set it up. We are wanting to get into orbit, so we have a couple maneuvers here we need to do. And I really like the alarm clock mod. It's just helpful if you're running multiple missions at the same time. Now we're going to come in. Here we go. Set up our polar orbit. Eve. There we go. And we have that upper stage, has almost no delta V left in it, so we will have it burn up in Eve's atmosphere and just get rid of it, avoiding debris in space. It would just go into interplanetary, probably wouldn't run into it or anything, but we'll go ahead and get rid of it like that and burn out around 150 kilometers above the surface. Be a pretty good scanning height. Set up our retrograde burn, so we're going to burn retrograde as our orbital path goes. And that will slow us down enough to get into orbit around Eve. I want to get in a pretty circular orbit. I think we're set up to do that. I am running the mod Spectra, and that's why I have clouds around Eve. I'm also running Waterfall, which is giving wonderful plume effects to the engines. I have downloaded Parallax again, and I'm using it for surface textures. You haven't really seen much of the surface yet. Hopefully when we start doing some landings, we will be able to really highlight how beautiful that mod makes the surface look. You can see I've got some of the near future mod parts here, and I've got the ScanSat parts on this particular probe. I love the way it looks, and I've been very happy, and this has been a fun career mode for me. We've got quite a few experiments on this probe, so I'm going to take advantage of that and hopefully transmit a lot of science back to Kerbal. There we go. And we can spend some of these points that we got, pick up a few technologies. Let's pick up, you know what, if I want to make shuttles, I'll probably go with the heavy aerodynamics, unlock some of the Mark III parts. And if we're going to be making bigger space planes or aircraft, we're probably going with some bigger landing gear. Go ahead and pick that up. And you know what, let's just go ahead and pick up these parts here. That's maybe all I'm going to do for now. I'll need to upgrade the R&D center to unlock those parts.